There's a particular kind of person who walks into a room at 68 and somehow shifts the temperature. Their hands move when they talk. Their eyes still track new information with hunger. Something about them feels less like an older version of who they used to be and more like a fuller version, as if the years added something rather than subtracting. And then there's the other kind. The person who reached a certain age and quietly stopped learning, stopped reaching, stopped letting their hands hold anything that didn't already have a known shape. They aren't sick. Nothing is technically wrong. But something inside them has gone still in a way that no amount of supplements or step counts can fix. Carl Jung noticed this divergence early in his work, and it disturbed him. Because it wasn't biology splitting these two groups apart. He saw patients in their late 70s whose minds were sharper than colleagues 30 years younger. He saw people in their 50s who'd already psychologically retired from being alive. The difference, he discovered, came down to a specific relationship the psyche needed to maintain with itself, a relationship that most people unknowingly severed somewhere around middle age. Jung called the second half of life the time when the soul demands what the ego spent the first half ignoring: meaning, depth, symbolic engagement with the world. And he found that people who continued aging well, not just biologically but spiritually, were almost always doing something specific with their time. They had habits, particular habits, with particular qualities, that kept their inner life in motion long after the world stopped requiring them to perform. Today I'm going to walk you through the 5 hobbies Jung's framework points to most directly. The activities that, when practiced past 60, actually slow the psychological aging that drags biological aging behind it. These aren't tips. They're patterns Jung saw repeated in the people who somehow stayed alive in the truest sense of the word, decade after decade, while their peers became echoes of themselves. Before we get into the hobbies, you need to understand something about what aging actually is, psychologically speaking. Because most people think aging is a physical process that eventually drags the mind down with it. Jung's observation was almost the opposite. He saw the psyche begin to wither first, and the body follow. When a person stops engaging with the unknown, stops being challenged, stops creating, stops asking who they are underneath their accomplishments, something in them begins to harden. The flexibility of the psyche depends on its continued movement, and when movement stops, calcification begins. Slowly at first, then all at once. The body reads the psyche's surrender as a signal that the work is done, and it starts winding down accordingly. Jung's framework suggests that staying psychologically young, not chasing youth, but maintaining the living quality of a person who hasn't yet finished becoming, requires deliberate engagement with specific kinds of activity. The 5 that follow aren't random. Each one targets a different aspect of the aging psyche that needs continued exercise. The first hobby is working with your hands in something that creates. Pottery, woodworking, painting, sewing, gardening at the level of actually shaping the soil, not just looking at flowers. Bread making, knitting that produces something real. The specific form matters less than what's happening underneath. Jung had a particular fascination with what he called the symbolic life, the ongoing relationship between the conscious mind and the deeper layers of the psyche that communicate through image, gesture, and made objects. He noticed that people who lost contact with this symbolic dimension aged in a particular way. They became literal, flat, stripped of the kind of inner texture that makes someone interesting to themselves. Working with your hands restores this dimension, because when your hands shape something, your unconscious participates. You don't make a pot the way you fill out a spreadsheet. The shape emerges through a conversation between your conscious intention and something deeper that's been waiting to express itself. Every made object is a small dialogue with the parts of yourself you can't access through thinking alone. Picture an older woman, 73, recently widowed, struggling to find a reason to get out of bed in the mornings. Her daughter convinces her to take a ceramics class. The first month is awkward. Her hands feel clumsy. The pots she makes are uneven, and she hates them. But something shifts in the 3rd month. She starts looking forward to the class. The clay starts feeling like it's telling her something. By the 6th month, she's making pieces that genuinely surprise her, shapes she didn't plan, colors she didn't choose consciously. And the grief that had been sitting on her chest for 2 years has somehow loosened, not because she worked through it logically, but because her hands gave it somewhere to go. This is what Jung was pointing at. Making things with your hands gives the psyche an outlet for material that would otherwise stagnate and turn inward as depression, rigidity, or that particular form of aging that looks like a person slowly becoming a photograph of themselves. The second hobby is learning something genuinely difficult, something you're bad at. This is the hobby people resist most, and it's the one Jung's framework defends most fiercely. Because the temptation past 60 is to do only what you're already good at. Stick with what you know. Perform competence. Avoid the embarrassment of being a beginner. And this temptation, completely understandable, completely natural, is also exactly what the psyche cannot afford. Jung noticed that the ego, by middle age, has constructed an identity it badly wants to protect. I'm good at X. I know about Y. I've mastered Z. This identity feels like security, but it's actually a cage. Because once the ego decides what you are, it spends enormous energy preventing you from becoming anything else. And that prevention is, psychologically speaking, what aging actually feels like from the inside. The doors are still there, you've just stopped trying them. Learning something hard, a language, an instrument, a complex skill, forces the ego to step back. You can't play violin badly and maintain the identity of someone who knows what they're doing. The screeching strings dethrone you. The forgotten verb conjugations humble you. And in that humility, in that deliberate beginner's awkwardness, something in the psyche reactivates. The part that was once curious. The part that could fail without it meaning anything about your worth. The part that doesn't need to be impressive to be alive. Jung would have recognized this as a form of psychological exercise that has no biological equivalent. The brain, of course, benefits. There's plenty of research showing new skill acquisition keeps neural pathways flexible. But Jung's interest was deeper. He saw that being a beginner again, voluntarily, regularly, was the antidote to the ego ossification that turns 60-year-olds into 90-year-olds before their bodies catch up. Think of the 70-year-old who decides to learn piano. The first 6 months are humiliating, in the gentle way humiliation can be when you've chosen it. His grandchildren laugh, kindly. His wife learns to leave the room during practice. But something in him is shifting. He's not just learning to play, he's relearning how to not know. He's restoring his relationship with the uncertain. And when his old friends, the ones who stopped learning new things in their 40s, visit, they can feel the difference between him and themselves, even if they can't name what it is. The third hobby is walking, specifically, walking without a destination. This sounds almost too simple to be on the list, but Jung walked obsessively, and he understood what most people miss about it. Walking, when it's done right, slow, alone, without a podcast in your ears or a step count being tracked, is one of the most direct ways the conscious mind can come into contact with the deeper psyche. There's something about the rhythm of walking, the alternating left-right of your feet against the ground, that quiets the part of the mind constantly producing thoughts and allows other material to surface. Memories you hadn't visited in decades, solutions to problems you'd given up on, images, almost like dreams, that arrive in the middle of an ordinary afternoon and feel significant before you can explain why. Jung built a tower at Bollingen specifically so he could walk. He noticed that his most important insights came during these walks, not during his work at his desk. And he came to understand that the psyche communicates differently when the body is in motion through landscape. Something gets unlocked that sitting cannot reach. Past 60, this kind of walking becomes even more potent because the psyche has more material to deliver. Decades of unprocessed experience, conversations you never finished, questions you've been avoiding asking yourself. A regular walking practice, 3 or 4 times a week, an hour at a time, alone, in a place with some natural element to it, creates the conditions for that material to come up and be metabolized rather than ferment into the kind of low-grade depression that older people are often told is just part of aging. Imagine an older man, 66, recently retired, drifting around his house with no idea what to do with himself. His daughter suggests he start walking in the morning. He resists, then tries it. The first few walks are uncomfortable, too quiet, too much time with his own mind, but he keeps going. And around the second month, something happens. He starts noticing things, the way the light falls on a particular tree, a memory of his father he hadn't thought about in 40 years, a question about his marriage he'd been carrying without knowing it. The walks become less about exercise and more about something he can't quite name. He starts looking forward to them, and the listless quality that had defined his early retirement quietly dissolves. If you've been feeling the pull of something more, that sense that there's a deeper conversation with yourself waiting to happen, but you don't quite know how to start it, you might find real value in the reflection exercises from True Self-Discovery. 24 practices built from Jung's approach to the inner life, designed for exactly the kind of moment when the surface of things stops being enough. The link is right below. Let's keep going. The fourth hobby is writing, but not the kind you're thinking of. Jung kept what he called the Red Book, a private record of his inner experiences, dreams, images, conversations with figures from his unconscious. He believed everyone past a certain age needed something similar, a place where the inner life could be witnessed, recorded, taken seriously enough to be put into words. Most people, when they think of writing as a hobby past 60, picture writing their memoirs, telling the grandchildren what life was like, documenting the family history, and there's real value in that. But Jung was pointing at something different, something less external, less about telling and more about discovering. The writing he meant is the kind where you sit down without knowing what you think and let the page reveal it to you. A dream you had, a feeling that's been hanging around without explanation, a memory that surfaced during a walk. You write it down. Then you write your way around it, into it, through it. You ask it questions on the page. You let it answer in language you didn't plan. And what you discover, almost every time if you do it honestly, is that you contain far more than you knew. Layers of yourself that the daytime mind doesn't have access to. This kind of writing is what Jung would have considered essential psychological maintenance for the second half of life. Because the unconscious, in older age, becomes louder, not quieter. It has more to say. Dreams become more vivid. Memories arrive uninvited. The deeper psyche, sensing that time is shorter, starts pushing material to the surface that it wants integrated before the end. People who have no outlet for this material often experience it as anxiety, depression, or a confusing restlessness they can't trace. People who write find it becomes the most generative period of their inner life. You don't need to be a writer. You don't need to be good at it. You need a notebook, 20 minutes most mornings, and the willingness to put down whatever's actually there rather than what you think should be there. The page becomes a kind of companion. The writing becomes a way of staying in conversation with yourself when the world's conversations have gotten quieter. A woman in her early 70s starts journaling after her therapist suggests it. She thinks it's pointless at first. Her entries are short, dry, descriptions of what she ate. But she keeps going. And around the 8th week, something shifts. She finds herself writing about her mother, things she's never told anyone, things she didn't know she remembered. She cries while writing, then laughs, then keeps writing. The notebook becomes the place where the woman she's been her whole life finally gets to speak. And the quality of her presence in the rest of her life changes, because the parts of her that had been compressed for decades finally have somewhere to expand. The fifth hobby is being meaningfully connected to people much younger than you. This last one isn't a hobby in the usual sense, but Jung's framework treats it as one of the most important activities of later life. He saw, again and again, that older people who stayed connected to younger generations, really connected, not just at obligatory family dinners, aged differently than those who isolated themselves among peers. Something happens psychologically when an older person engages seriously with someone in their 20s or 30s or 40s. The younger person brings their unresolved questions, their fresh struggles, their uncertain becoming. And the older person, in offering perspective, accidentally activates something in themselves. They remember who they were at that age. They access wisdom they didn't know they'd accumulated. They re-engage with the part of themselves that still has something to give, still has stake in the future, still belongs to a world that's continuing past their own lifetime. Jung wrote about the elder archetype, the older figure whose role in the psyche of a community was to hold continuity, to transmit, to bridge what was with what's coming. And he believed that older individuals who didn't find some version of this role within their own lives suffered for it. They became closed systems. Whatever they'd accumulated had nowhere to go, and the unused capacity turned inward, becoming bitterness, rigidity, or that particular form of withdrawal that looks like dignity but feels, from the inside, like slowly disappearing. The form this takes can be anything: mentoring a younger colleague, teaching a skill to someone learning, being a real presence in your grandchildren's lives, not as the indulgent figure who buys things, but as the listener, the witness, the one who tells them what you actually learned from your decades of being alive. Volunteering with young people, joining communities where age isn't the organizing principle. Picture an older man, 78, who'd retired from his profession and slowly become invisible. His former colleagues started inviting him to lunch with their younger team members, partly out of respect, partly out of practical wisdom they wanted preserved. He resisted at first, feeling like a relic, but he started going, and the conversations woke something up in him. The younger lawyers had questions he hadn't been asked in years. Their struggles reminded him of his own at their age. By the second year, he was a regular. By the third, the firm was paying him as an informal advisor. By the fifth, his own children noticed he seemed younger than he had a decade earlier. The exchange was nourishing him, in a way nothing else had. This is the pattern Jung kept seeing. The flow has to continue. What you've accumulated needs somewhere to go. And the younger generations, whether they realize it or not, are hungry for what the older generations have been carrying. The connection feeds both sides. And the alternative, staying in a closed loop of peers, declining together, talking about the same things you've talked about for decades, is the psychological equivalent of slowly closing a door that, once shut, becomes very hard to open again. So these are the 5 Jung's framework points toward most clearly. Working with your hands, learning something hard, walking without a destination, writing into your own inner life, staying connected to people much younger than you. You'll notice these hobbies don't have much in common on the surface. One involves clay, another a language, another your feet, another a notebook, another other human beings. But underneath, they share a single quality. Each one keeps the psyche in conversation, with the unconscious, with the unknown, with the parts of yourself that haven't finished becoming, with the world that's continuing past your own story. This is what Jung came to see as the actual mechanism of psychological aging. Not the years passing, the conversations ending, the doors closing, the flow stopping. And the 5 hobbies on this list are simply 5 different ways of refusing that closure. 5 different ways of keeping the door open between the conscious you and everything you still contain. There's something else worth saying about these hobbies, because it matters for whether you'll actually do them. Each one requires you to tolerate some level of discomfort. The pottery class where you feel clumsy, the piano lessons where you sound terrible, the walks where uncomfortable memories surface, the writing where things you didn't want to know come up onto the page, the young people who challenge what you thought you'd settled. The discomfort isn't a sign you're doing them wrong. The discomfort is the work, because the parts of you that need to be reactivated are exactly the parts that comfort doesn't reach. The ego prefers to be left alone, to confirm what it already knows, to avoid the small humiliations of being a beginner or the small griefs of facing what you've avoided. And the older you get, the louder the ego's voice becomes about keeping things settled. Jung's framework is unsparing about this. He noticed that people who chose comfort past a certain age aged faster. Their bodies got the message that the work was done. Their minds began closing the rooms they'd stopped visiting. and by the time they realized something was being lost, the loss was already advanced. The people who aged well, really well, in the way that has nothing to do with looking young, were the ones who voluntarily stayed in productive discomfort, who kept their hands busy with something they hadn't mastered, who kept their minds reaching for what they couldn't quite grasp, who kept their feet moving through landscape and their pen moving across pages, and their lives intersected with people who weren't yet who they were going to be. These people stayed alive in the deepest sense of the word, and the years, when they came as additions rather than subtractions. If you take one thing from all of this, take this. The activities that keep you young past 60 are the ones that keep your psyche in motion. And motion, by definition, requires you to be going somewhere you haven't already been. Anything else, no matter how comfortable, no matter how respectable, is just a different word for sitting still. The hands that shape clay, the fingers that fumble with new strings, the feet that walk without a destination, the pen that finds words your mind didn't plan, the voice that speaks to someone half your age and discovers it still has something to say. These are the small, daily activities of a person who is refusing to finish. And you can begin any of them today. Not in some grand gesture, just a small one. A class signed up for, a notebook bought, a walk taken without your phone, a young person you reach out to with genuine interest in what they're going through. Jung would tell you that the second half of life isn't the descent everyone treats it as. It's the chapter where what you've gathered finally gets used, where the inner life, given any encouragement, becomes richer than it's ever been, where you discover, often to your own surprise, that you weren't aging the way you feared. You were becoming someone you couldn't have been when you were younger, someone whose hands knew more, whose mind held more, whose presence carried weight that wasn't available to you at 30 or 40 or even 50. That becoming doesn't happen automatically. The body ages on its own. The psyche needs participation. And the 5 hobbies on this list are 5 different ways of participating, 5 different invitations to stay in conversation with what's still alive in you and wants to keep being expressed. The room you walk into at 68, 73, 81 isn't determined by what time has done to your face. It's determined by whether something in you is still reaching, still curious, still willing to be a beginner, still moving toward what you haven't yet become. Jung spent the last decades of his life embodying this. He kept carving stone at his tower. He kept writing into his own inner life. He kept walking. He kept engaging with younger thinkers who challenged him. He kept being, in his late 70s and into his 80s, someone whose presence felt alive in a way that had nothing to do with youth and everything to do with refusal. The quiet, steady refusal to close down before he had to. That refusal is available to you. The hobbies are just the form it takes. Pick one. Start small. Tolerate the awkwardness. Let your hands find their way towards something they don't yet know how to do. And watch what happens to the rest of your life as the conversation inside you starts moving again. If something in this resonated, if you've been sensing that the surface of your life isn't enough anymore and you're ready to start meeting the deeper parts of yourself, true self-discovery was built for exactly this kind of opening. 24 reflection exercises grounded in Jung's work, designed to help you continue the conversation these hobbies begin. The link is right below this video. Take a look when you're ready.